last legs right now unless we do something about it. And that's why I think we're getting the enthusiasm, because there is something we can do about it. And it's not something brand new. How about just sending only people to Washington who read the Constitution, understood it, and obey the Constitution? On the war issue, you mean we couldn't go to war without a declaration? There wouldn't have been a war since World War II. Oh, how tragic that would be if we couldn't have this war. No more wars without a declaration. Get our troops on home. There was a time where they used to paint the label that if you didn't vote for the wars and all the expenditures you didn't like the troops, you were un-American, you were unpatriotic. But guess what? If that's true, why do we get the most support from the troops? Our people! And very simply, we need to follow Article 1, Section 8, dealing with war. You don't go to war unless the people have it declared through their representatives in government. And we deny the authority to the president to go to war on his own. But what about the arrogance of a president that will come down, or their Secretary of Defense, and say, oh, we don't need to go to the Congress to get our marching orders. We can go to the... They claim they can go to the United Nations. Well, I'd like the United Nations to leave and then deal with it. So this week, there's a little bit of foreign policy going on. Our president was down in Colombia, in South America. You know, I didn't know exactly what was going on, but you know I declined to have the Secret Service protect me.
You guys hear about that?
Comment on immediate diplomatic efforts around the world with our president. But, you know, it's irresistible because our president went down there to represent us. And the first issue that came up is, Mr. President of the United States, could we have a discussion and maybe a more open dialogue with Cuba? Isn't the Cold War over? The president said, no way, we can't do that. We got to be tough on the Cubans. I say, let's trade with Cuba, let's go to Cuba, let's travel to Cuba. Why don't then, that would undermine that system. When you trade and talk to people and travel, that is what undermines their government, not sanctions. There are now many people in Central America, in Mexico, and South America, as well as in this country, that have come around to a very different position on the drug war. So this subject came up, and the position of the other government said that maybe we ought to discuss it. Maybe we ought to change these drug laws. Yes, I think we should discuss it. I think we should come to the same conclusion that we did after we tried prohibition of alcohol when it failed to repeal prohibition of drugs. Issue is a very important issue. Drugs are very dangerous. But what isn't dangerous? Driving cars is dangerous, and there's all kinds of things. But who's responsible to protect you against danger? You're supposed to be the one. If you believe the government can protect us against ourselves, that is giving up all your liberty. The government owns you if they can protect you against all your own personal actions. Whether it's fire, whether it's drugs or fire across the street, children are taught by the parents. The parents are the best teachers to assume that all this is to be done by the nanny state from the federal government writing regulations. It's a fallacy. All they do is write a lot of laws, cause a lot of mischief, spend a lot of money, and bureaucrats make all the money, and then they arrest people for doing things that has harm, no nobody whatsoever. We have 5% of the population of the world. We have 25% of the prisoners. Many of them, some estimate well over half, are non-violent prisoners. So I would say that the American people aren't bad people compared to the rest of the world. I would say we have too many laws is the problem. This very year on January 1st, there were 40,000 new laws passed on January 1st. What I would like to suggest to you, as president, I would like to be the first president ever to repeal 40,000. Those laws that were passed by executive order are all illegal. I don't believe in legislating through the executive order, but I do believe if they're illegal executive order, a president can repeal those executive orders. Now, we could start with the most recent one. This about two weeks ago, the president renewed the Defense Production Act, which has been around since 1950, which is emergency powers for a president in time of war can socialize everything, take control of all finances and all industry. And that has been renewed pretty regularly. But this year, it was renewed by the president writing an executive order, but he made a few little changes. He said, yes, in time of war, but he added in time of peace also. Also, he wrote an executive order and said that it is now permissible and the law of the land, according to him, that he, as president, can decide if he needs to go out and assassinate an American citizen. As a law in the books, it's been used now a couple times. You say, well, just a couple times, probably bad people. But the law is written for bad people, too, because if bad people don't get a trial, we won't get a trial either. So this is the reason when the big debate came up about Obama talking about the courts and instructing the courts about Obamacare, there was a lot of concern about that, but I think it was blown out of proportion. Obviously, he deserved that criticism. But what about him becoming the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury, and the executioner? Isn't that a bit of a violation of the judicial system? So there are so many places that we need to be checked. But you know, Congress is supposed to resist this when the president usurps his powers, but our Congress this last year, over my strong objection, they passed the National Defense Authorization Act, which virtually repeals posse comitatus, keeping the military out of the business of policing us day to day. But now it is the law of the land that American citizens can be arrested. Now that's bad enough, but an American citizen can be arrested and put in a secret prison and never see a juror, and never see an attorney, and be held indefinitely. That's the law of the land. If we want to live in a republic, we have to repeal those laws, and we have to get a president who will use the executive order to get rid of that type of strip searches. 5-4 ruling has said the police or federal agents, the TSA or whomever, are allowed to strip search anybody without probable cause of anything. by and demonstrates within so many feet of this special person that is protected by the Secret Service can end up, just by demonstrating or saying something or holding up a sign, they get 10 years in prison. I think they need a new education about what the First Amendment means. That's for sure. The National Security Agency now has just opened the construction of a new facility in Utah. It's the biggest in the history of the world, and it's made up all of computers. It's supposed to be able to hold not billions of information of everything they can find. Emails, websites, telephone calls, mail, everything. And it literally holds trillions and trillions of dollars of items of information. And they're in the process of doing this. Why do they need to know so much about us? We need to know more about them. The government is not secret. In a free society, the people have their privacy. But today, there's too much secrecy, and we've lost too much of our privacy. And we could start, if we want more transparency, let's start with the Federal Reserve and find out who's vote for this. But right now, the war fever is beating the drums for a move, not to get those troops home, but they're beating the war drums to go into Syria, which we're already in partially. And of course, are they willing to talk to and work with and maybe work something out with Iran? No, they want to march in and start bombing Iran. Believe me. These are very bad ideas, and the American people are now on our side because about 70-some% of the American people said, get out of Afghanistan and bring these troops home. Sometimes they're distorted, they might be well-meaning, but the entitlement system really doesn't work. I am convinced that if you have concern about your fellow man, which I believe most people do, I believe that if you have humanitarian instincts, you don't want to see people starving in the streets, then the only solution, the only political solution to that is to have a free society and a prosperous society, and you will be able to take care of those problems much better than any other system available to us. The entitlement system is obviously sold on, well, there's always the poor, and we have to take care of the poor. We don't want anybody not to have a house, not to have free medical care, not to have free education. And, okay, that's right, there's some that are always needed, but you know, if you subsidize something, you get a lot more of it. But it never solves the problem. Take the housing efforts. It's been going on for a long time, especially before the housing bubble collapsed. The whole idea was to make sure that everybody could afford a house. So they create money out of thin air, and then they have government informative programs that say, you can't deny anybody a loan, make bad loans, just give everybody a house. And it seemed to be so wonderful because people would get their houses and the value of the house would go up and they'd borrow more money. It would look like a cash cow. But that was supposed to help the poor people. But who made the money when the bubble was being built up? Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac and insurance companies, the Goldman Sachs of the world, they were making all this money. And then when the predictable bubble burst and there was a collapse, what happened? Oh yes, there was hollering and screaming, something has to come, Congress has to bail out. Who will bail out? The wealthy, the people who made all the money off the system. They got trillions of dollars in bailout, both from the Congress as well as from the Federal Reserve. So what happened to the people that were supposed to be helped with the entitlement system? They lost their jobs and they lost their houses. This system, when they tell you that it's our foreign policy is to spread democracy and make peace in the world, or the entitlement system is supposed to help the poor and bring them prosperity. Exactly the opposite works. It's the same way when you call something the Patriot Act, it's unpatriotic and So the entitlement system does not work, and it's very biased and slanted. Now, this system is very unfair because if you undermine the value of the currency, if you just separate that from everything else, if you undermine the value of the currency, just print more, dilute the value of money, there is a systematic transfer of wealth from the middle class to the wealthy. Because the wealthy, the banks, the government, and the big workers, they use the money first. Then it circulates, especially through fractional reserve banking, and each unit goes down in value and your prices go up. So there's always a transfer of wealth. You get to use the money first. But it's much worse when the government, makes these contracts. But the wealthy, that group of people, and sometimes it's referred to the 99 and 1, and say, well, that 1%, they're the evil monsters. No. But I break the 1% or the 2%, I break them in two sections. One, the honest people who made money by providing a good product for us, and we made them welcome. And we should separate them from the people who made money because they had the contracts and all the benefits, from the Federal Reserve, and they got the bailout. There's a big difference. So that is the reason that the simple solution for this is no more bailouts. That's what we need is a lot more confidence in ourselves and understanding the free market system. When the Depression hit, there was a change philosophically. It was the Keynesian interventionist economic system that took over. So the spin then was, as it continues today, is that we had the Depression because we had capitalism and we had the gold standard. And this was untrue, but they got the blame, and that ushered in the big age of Keynesian economics. Today they're doing the same thing. They claim it was the unregulated free markets that gave us this. But the many problems, whether it was the Fannie Mae's and the Freddie Macs and the intervention and the Federal Reserve, that those weren't free markets. Free markets require people to work hard and save money and put it in the bank, and the interest rate is regulated by the marketplace. So that's why it's important to blame the right problems. In 1920, we had a bad depression, but we kept our hands off the mistakes made by the manipulation of money and credit during World War I. But the motivation to bail out anybody in 1920, 21 wasn't there, and it was over in a year, and we don't even really study that in history anymore, because we liquidated, got rid of the mistakes, and get rid of the debt, and we went back to working again. It'd be best to have a system that you don't even build these mistakes in, but if you have them, you have to get rid of the debt. Just like if one of us gets into bankruptcy, you either have to get another job and sell off your goods or go to bankruptcy, but you've got to get rid of all the mistakes that we made. But today, what have we done? We've just propped them up now for five years. We're trying to keep, in spite of the housing prices going down, there's an effort to get housing stimulated, build more houses and keep the prices up. No, you want government interference out of the way. The marketplace works. That's why we were a great and wealthy nation, because we did have confidence in ourselves. But even the marketplace, whether it's the market or civil liberties or foreign policy, it is based on that fundamental fact about what is individual liberty all about. Liberty, for me, comes to us in a natural or God-given way. It doesn't come from our government. Somebody said, well, I'm introducing these gold coins and I want you to circulate them. But if that businessman cheated us and skipped on the gold in it or defrauded us or didn't have the gold, they would be committing fraud and they would go to prison for that. But now we allow our government to do that. Maybe we should suggest that there should be penalties for the counterfeiting. When there were gold coins and gold contracts, the government ruled that the contracts had no validity to them. They just threw them out. They said, oh no, you don't have to pay in gold, just pay in Federal Reserve notes, let the Fed print money and we'll pay off our bills. So government got off the hook, as well as private individuals did not have to pay in gold. So the government was doing exactly the opposite of what they have to do. Our Constitution is not complex. What we need are a whole new generation grow up and look at this and say the Constitution is the rule book. If a free society society. That's how strongly I feel. But we never have to take that argument. We don't have to be defensive on that because we won't be poorer. We will be richer. But if you have a society that's very, very wealthy because we've had free markets and sound money, and we get directing ourselves only to the material benefits and using the government to redistribute these benefits and have a new system of economics, then and the problem there is people forget about where the wealth comes from. They forget, they concentrate on the materialism and the redistribution at the same time that they forget about is what is freedom all about. And this is what I think this revolution is all about. What is freedom all about? And then let me tell you, from my viewpoint, freedom is still very popular. In the 1960s, we were suffering the consequences of the war going on and drugs and all kinds of social problems. But and it was clearly divided between left and right. It was actually more confusing than it is now because I think we're dividing it differently. Freedom and totalitarianism. There's a big difference. But in the 1960s, what they used to talk about, that I used to hear them say, they said, well, if you were 20 years old and you weren't liberal, you didn't have a heart. But if you were 40 and you didn't have, if you weren't a conservative, you didn't have a brain. Well, I would like to suggest to you that the freedom philosophy I'm talking about means we should have both a heart and a brain together. Have been around for a long time. You go back to the Magna Carta, but just think, the current administration is actually undermining the writ of habeas corpus and government assassinations, these kind of things. So we are canceling a lot of things that were developed over many, many centuries. But what about the real experiment? The real experiment in liberty has been in this country. It was the best experiment and the best constitution, but there's only a remnant left. We know what it is. We can restore it. We can go back to it. It's a lot better than if we didn't have that history. So I believe that the transition backwards is better. But it isn't going backwards. They claim that we are the past, but the people who are the past are the ones who believe in tyranny and big government and controlling our lives and controlling our economy. So if we can go back and pick up on sound money, improve upon it, it's far from a perfect system, improve on economic understanding, which has happened with the study of Austrian economics. There's no reason in the world why we can't be the future and not the past as the other side. One of the most important things that we get out of freedom is, our responsibility for ourselves. But freedom means you do make these choices for ourselves, but people are always hesitant. There's one group will say, well, that sounds good, but we can't trust people to spend their own money because they won't take care of themselves the way we think they should take care of themselves. So they embark on destroying the currency, bankrupting the country, and taking away our liberties and accomplishing nothing else. So the group that believes that we have to have economic intervention has to accept the fact that people will have a natural right to their liberties in their life and the fruits of their labor, and they ought to be able to spend the money as they darn well please. When it comes to personal liberty, you should have your liberty to do what you want. We understand this pretty well when we talk about religious freedom. The First Amendment protects that, and you should never be penalized for it. But it also protects those people who choose not to have religious beliefs. That should bring us together. It should bring us together placed on their neighbor and the government. But that's where the flaw is. You shouldn't make this assumption that there's always the moral hazard that somebody else will take care of us if we don't take care of ourselves. If you're told that you have personal freedom on your own life, on your own lifestyles, and your own habits, that you might do some harm. Well, this is true. In a society like this, where there's economic and personal liberty, you become, or it is necessary that we become more tolerant. People say, oh no, I can't tolerate. They're going to go out and gamble and do these things that I just disapprove of. But you know, tolerance, when they don't hurt other people, they only can hurt themselves, is quite a bit different than endorsing something. Because we have religious freedom, we don't endorse the religion that people practice. So why can people say, well, we have personal liberties, we're endorsing what their bad habits might be? That isn't the case. Right now, what I witness is a restoration of a deep interest in what a free society is all about. And we have to do it rather quickly. And the reason why there's more attention now is the recognition that our foreign policy is failing, it's a failure, and the leadership in both parties at this very moment do not offer us many alternatives. When the Democrats are in, they think a Republican might say something differently. And when the Republicans are in, the Democrats say something else, and nothing ever changes. They claim that, like the administration changed, they would have a different attitude about the use of medical marijuana, but it never seems to happen. I think the medical marijuana issue is interesting because, once again, it can bring people together. Some people criticize libertarians and conservatives for defending the principle of the states making these determinations. The states should be able to make some of these determinations. But some are accused that if you say states' rights, then they paint you as a bad person. But why would this be the case? If you live in a state where medical marijuana has been legalized, why don't you say under the Constitution that the federal government has no right to come in and override the state law? The drug issue is one area where I'm cautiously optimistic because our country did wake up on insanity and the ill-advised prohibition of alcohol. And alcohol obviously is a very, very dangerous drug. So I think people will wake up, especially when they start looking at the problem. When you look at addiction as a crime rather than a disease, it might be a lot different. If we looked at it in this manner, I think there would be a much better acceptance than saying that we have to throw everybody in prison for these things. So this is where I am cautiously optimistic that one day we're going to wake up, and it might be that the states will just grab hold of nullification and say, look, we don't want you involved. We don't want you coming in here. But there's every reason to be optimistic that we can turn this around. Optimistic, one reason, because people are recognizing that we have a problem. We have a drug addiction, and we have an addiction to big government. So if we know we have the addiction, we know that we have to quit. And this is what I think has happened in the last 4 or 5 years. I've been talking about this for a long time, and the reception is completely different since the financial crisis hit, and these prolonged wars have continued with no end in sight, and with the bankruptcy on our doorstep. The American people, especially the young people, are starting to realize, what am I getting into? I want a better deal. Let everything would explode on the side of spending and deficits and prices and financial bubbles and the crisis that we have. But the Fed is important because it facilitates big government. So we can describe what liberty is all about, and we can look for better people to go to Washington, hope they don't vote a certain way. But if you didn't have a Fed, it wouldn't be financed. Because the members of Congress, if they kept responding and saying, well, I have to vote for this or I won't get reelected, if they did that, they'd have to raise taxes if they didn't have the Fed. They had to keep borrowing. The interest rates would go up. As long as you have the Fed there, you delay the problem. You delay it, and you can allow this government to grow and grow. And that is what's happened. Almost every war fought throughout history has been fought with destruction of currencies. So in many ways, there's such a benefit with honesty and money. The founders understood this, and they tried to save us from ourselves. But we didn't follow the rules. Matter of fact, they warned us rather clearly about democracy. Don't drift into democracy, because democracy is very bad, because rights become arbitrary. Their argument was that democracy would eventually waste our economy and waste our whole system. And it would be consuming, it would be building wealth. And it would continue by the dictatorship of the majority to the point where the whole thing collapses on itself. So we know what the problem is. We know what the solution is. We need to get more energized. We need to change the nature of government. We need to change the understanding of the people and the role of government. And we can reverse that. We can once again restore the greatness of America with freedom and prosperity.